When we're young, many of us think of what it is we want to be when we grow up. And maybe we say we feel we have a calling. And some of those callings might be I feel called to work with people, I feel called to teach, I feel called to work with animals, I feel called to work outside. But I'm pretty sure nobody ever thinks I feel called to change dirty diapers or to clean up vomit or to be stressed out 24/7. But the reality is, when we feel called to care for someone else, whether that's as a parent, as a caregiver for a spouse, a child, anyone, we're being called to put someone else's needs, well being above our own. That's a sacred calling. When we choose to live that out, we're choosing to lay ourselves aside every day and put someone else's needs above our own. When my children were very little, I remember realizing this. The days were long and hard, and I was tired all the time. And I remember realizing that I had a choice to make. I could either get through it, kind of grin and bear it, or I could really embrace the opportunity that I had in front of me and give it everything I had. Now, there's a temptation when you're caring for someone to start to feel sorry for yourself because the job is hard and you can get bitter and resentful and angry. And while I feel like there's probably good reason to feel that way, it doesn't make the job any easier. So when I had the realization that I had that choice to make, to either just get through it or to give it everything I had, I decided that I would care for each of my kids as though I were single handedly caring for someone who would be a great figure in history. Because I realized that every great human who had ever lived had a mom. And I'm sure when that woman was raising that child, they never thought, oh, this is going to be the next Nobel Peace Prize winner. This is going to be the next great world leader. This is going to be the next great scientist or philanthropist or astronaut or president or whoever. The woman just raised her child. So when I embraced those menial tasks as part of my calling to raise, who knows? I don't know. Maybe the next president, probably not. But I raised each one of them as though they would be something great. And that made my calling as a mom something sacred. So every time I was changing a diaper, every time I was getting someone a drink, every time I was telling them it was time for bed or fighting with them about naps or what they would eat for lunch, that was all part of the sacred calling that was on my heart. And I could find purpose in that. So we're going to talk about finding purpose in that calling.
This is such an important topic, and this is something that I've talked to a lot of other caregivers about. And because it is so different than caring for a child, you have to really figure out how to get to that point where you do find purpose in the calling. Because Jenna, you and I have talked a lot about being a caregiver to someone who's disabled, me taking care of my spouse, that it's the reverse of taking care of children. I was taking care of someone who was dying. And how do you find purpose in that? Because in the end, he's not going to be with me anymore. So I'm really glad that we're talking about this.
Do you see that the result of the effort and the work that you put into caring for him ended up making you into a stronger person and developing you. And although he is gone, you're not. And you're more, perhaps you're more than you would have been had you not walked that path.
Oh, definitely. Ultimately, everything that I did, I knew that I had to live with after he was gone. And so that was how I looked at it. It was in the beginning, it was a comparison of my life to everyone else's because my life looked so different from everyone else. There was not a single person in my life who was going through anything close to what I was going through. And so I had to stop comparing my life to everyone else's and just look at it as this is our life. What do I want this to look like? And then I also had to stop accepting other people's opinions because they were giving their opinions based on what their life was like, not what my life was like. And so as I look back on my life, I can see what a difference I made in both of our lives by doing that. And yes, I believe that I am a much better person now because of it.
So, in the process of pouring into your husband, ultimately you ended up pouring into the future version of yourself. That's pretty cool. Did you have any idea, or did you ever think for 1 second while you were caring for your husband, who you knew would die, did you ever think that the work you were doing there was going to be waiting for you at the end? Future you would be stronger, more resilient, more capable, braver, more confident than had you just gotten by in caring for Lance.
The thought never crossed my mind. I was doing what I was doing so that we could live the best life possible, so that I could look back and know that I had done everything to make Lance's life as good as it could be. It wasn't about me at the time, it was about him. And now I see the benefit to me now. There's so much more that I can do because of all the things that I did then, and because of the attitude that I carried through all the years that I cared for him.
That's what I am hearing, is that's the point, is that your purpose was to make your life with him and his life with you as great as it could be. And in doing that, knowing that you would reach the other side with as few regrets or no regrets. I think that's a choice. I think regret is a choice, but there's always things we can look back and think like, oh, here's what I learned from that situation. Here's what I might have done differently. Here's how I'll do that differently going forward. Um, but you knew that was your purpose, is to get to that place, whether you realized it or not. I think subconsciously you knew it was getting to the other side of that with no regrets and knowing that you had done everything you could, whether you knew what that would produce in you going forward or the benefit that that would give you going forward. That was your purpose. Let's make these years we have together as fantastic as they can be. And I'm going to pour every last ounce of me into this calling.
And being a caregiver isn't something that I think anybody thinks, I want to take care of my disabled spouse. I want to take care of someone who is sick for the rest of their life. That's not generally something that people are called to. I mean, there are nurses and there are all kinds of people who take care of others as caregivers in a part-time role, but full-time for the rest of your life or the rest of your loved one's life. That's not generally something that I hear people say, oh, this is what I really wanted to do for the rest of my life. So finding the purpose in that was a little bit more challenging, but I'm so glad that I was able to look at it the way that I did. And I can imagine, never having had children, I can just imagine what it was like being a parent and finding your purpose and really putting everything you had into that. And I've just always been so impressed by the way that you raised your children and how well your children have turned out because of that. Do you think that you expected your life to look the way that it does because of the way that you raised your children and the choices that you made?
No. Oh my gosh, no. I if I'm really honest, I didn't really have expectation for my kids, for my life, what it would look like, but I carried a big weight. I'm not sure what caused me to realize the gravity and the seriousness and the consequence of what I was doing by raising kids, because I looked around and you've said nobody else was living the life that you lived. And I don't know if other parents feel this way, but I always felt like I was doing things differently. And I always felt odd. And I always felt people were questioning what I was doing because I didn't do things the same as everyone else around me. So, and even as my kids got older, they would kind of like, why are we like this? Why are you doing things this way? And I didn't always have a good answer for them. I just would say, this is just what I feel I have to do. Because here's the secret to being a parent that nobody tells you is at the end of the day, you're making all the calls. And so how your child turns out in some respect has a lot to do with the choices that you made for that child. And you are not going to get every single one of them right. And you don't get to decide. And here's a truth that I learned as I got older and as my kids got older. I realized that this is true for everyone, not just between parents and children. You don't get to decide when something you say or do hits someone in a way that sticks with them forever and changes their perspective and who they are moving forward. And they don't get to decide when something that someone else says or does hits them in a way that changes them or alters their path going forward. And so I knew that with my kids, that I could just be going along on my day to day and say something. And there was a potential that that thing that I said that carried zero consequence in my heart or in that moment completely changed their life. And it wasn't until the last few years that I realized that that still happens. It happens in marriages, it happens in our jobs, it happens with our adult friends, it happens with maybe grandchildren.
Well, and it happened with me while I was caring for Lance. I realized that um, as his dementia progressed and his memory loss got worse, that he didn't necessarily remember what I said. In fact, he almost never remembered what I said, but he was left with this feeling. And at the end of the day, I've said this before, at the end of the day, if it had been a pretty good day, then he felt good. If at the end of the day, a whole bunch of negative things had happened, he didn't feel so good and he wasn't happy. And I wanted to make sure that the impact that I had on him was a good one, that it was a positive one.
That's exactly it. It's knowing that everything we do, everything we say, every action, every failure to act, everything carries with it a potential for harm and a potential for good. And it's being responsible for those actions. And that's the purpose. I'm responsible for everything I do in this relationship with this person that I'm caring for, because that's my calling, whether I like it or not. That's my calling right now. I chose mine. You did not choose yours. But at the end of the day, that's my calling. So, how do I make the most of this and find purpose in it? And my purpose was to the best of my ability, say and do things that would feed life into my children, make them better, make them stronger, make them more resilient, make them more independent and self-sufficient. And I think that I was just embracing the responsibility of my words and actions. And I think that was the purpose, is like to make that as good as possible and to just be responsible for that.
Well, going back to what you said about this is what you chose, this is not the life that I chose, but I chose to stay. Lance didn't choose to be sick. And so the attitude that I took from that was what helped me as well. I might not have chosen this to be my life. Who would choose that to be your life? But I chose to stay and I chose to make it the best life possible, just the same as you did as a mother.
Because I can't say it, and I wish I could, but we don't live in a perfect world. I can't say that every person that's ever had a child truly shoulders the responsibility of raising those children to the best of their ability. Some people take on that responsibility and others do not. So there is a choice to be made in all of it. And I think that purpose that you found in saying, I didn't choose this, but here I am, and I'm going to make the best of what we have. And I'm going to take full responsibility for everything going forward, as if I'm caring for the most important person in the world, because that's what you did.
Yeah, not as if I was caring for the most important person in the world. And I told Lance that, and he knew it all the way up until the day that he died. He knew that he was the most important person in my world.
I love that so much. Um, I hope that in sharing these ideas, we're able to help others maybe find a little more purpose in whatever calling that's maybe been thrust upon them, or maybe something they chose. But I think we all have the ability to make that choice and find that purpose in that calling. So, anyway, it's been fantastic. I'm glad we talked about this, and I can't wait to have our next conversation. Thanks for joining me today. I'll see you next time.
All right. Bye, Jenna.